Everybody, welcome to Rev'd Up for Sunday. We're the clergy of St. Mark's Episcopal Church in New Canaan, Connecticut, and I'm Peter Walsh.
I'm Elizabeth Garnsey.
And I'm John Kennedy.
And this is a big day for us. We are taking a look at the resurrection text as John tells us. So this is the Easter Day text. This is also our 200th podcast, which is shocking in its own right. Yep. And I think as the two come together, it makes me realize something, which is no matter how many times you look at the scriptures, there's always something in them. Jesus broke in the resurrection, and the word breaks in with us. And so we're going to take a look at a piece of scripture that's very familiar to us and yet is ever new once we look at it. So, as all of you know, in John's Gospel, the beginnings of this all begin in chapter 20. We're going to take a look at verses 1 to 18. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the tomb. So she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, and said to them, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." Then Peter and the other disciple set out and went toward the tomb. The two were running together, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent down to look in and saw the linen wrappings lying there, but he did not go in. Then Simon Peter came, following him, and went into the tomb. He saw the linen wrappings lying there and the cloth that had been on Jesus' head, not lying with the linen wrappings, but rolled up in a place by itself. Then the other disciple, who reached the tomb first, also went in, and he saw and believed. For as yet they did not understand the scripture, that he must rise from the dead. Then the disciples returned to their homes. But Mary stood weeping outside the tomb. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb, and she saw two angels in white, sitting where the body of Jesus had been lying, one at the head and the other at the feet. They said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She said to them, "They have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him." When she had said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not know it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you looking for?" Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him in Hebrew, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said to her, "Do not hold on to me, because I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and to your Father, to my God and to your God." Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord." And she told them he had said these things to her. Okay, so here we are. We have the Easter kerygma, right? The Easter teaching, perhaps the most important teaching in the church. And we have Mary Magdalene, the unlikely recipient and deliverer. Clearly, this happened to Mary Magdalene. And then we get this resurrection scene in two scenes, really, what we've read here. The first being, Act 1 being the empty cave. And yes, Jesus is the star of the whole show, but in the first 10 verses, it's Mary Magdalene, Peter, and the beloved disciple. And seeing is believing. And then in Act 2, we have Mary Magdalene encountering and proclaiming the risen Jesus. And in Act 2, Mary is the star. Obviously, Jesus is the ultimate star, but here we go. Why don't we see if we can take a little bit, if we get an overview, but let's take this by Act 1. Let's take the arrival to the tomb first, and then we'll take Mary secondly. Is that okay with you guys? Just as a little organizational?
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Peter, you kind of slipped something in there that I think is worth expanding upon, that with Mary Magdalene being reported here as the first person to see the risen Jesus, that I think you said, like, this must have happened to her. And just worth noting that this is one of the classical arguments for the resurrection, right? That the Gospels despite the little differences in the details, which we might get into later, of how they report the resurrection, what is consistent, with the exception of Luke, who has Jesus first appearing to the disciples on the road to Emmaus, in the other three Gospels, if you count the longer ending to Mark, Jesus appears to women first, and particularly in John and in Mark, again, if you count Mark with his longer ending, Mary Magdalene first. And whether it's Mary or other women in the case of Matthew, the testimony of women due to the horrendous sexism and patriarchy of the world at that time, including of the culture of Jesus and the people of Jesus, that wouldn't have counted for anything. So it's a bizarre invention if it is a mythological invention. And so it is therefore an astonishing detail that we have Jesus appearing first to Mary. And it's a beautiful thing, and it's a ennobling thing, and indeed she is the first apostle. Yeah.
N.T. Wright talks a lot about that. He
Yes.
says if they were trying to write an apologetic form of the resurrection story, they really took a sideways turn by making the women the first witnesses. Good point.
I super love that, and this telling of the drama is so full of symbolism and reality. I think blended together, and all this stuff, redaction and all that. But the word comes through, and so we start in the pre-dawn darkness, and so it's early in the morning, clearly, and that's consonant with all the stories. And that Mary heads out, and then she has the big shocker. And the big shocker is the tomb is empty. And then there's a whole lot of running.
Right. We really miss that in our 2,000 years later, 2,000 Easter celebrations that are so joyful, beautiful, festive, uplifting. The first one was so confusing. They're completely befuddled and lost and oh my gosh, and scared. And Peter, the men running back and forth, it's really hard to appreciate how stunning and unsettling that it must have been to experience this. And it's told, but it isn't really captured. I don't think how there's no explanation for it at all. And remains no explanation. But they experienced something, and it's so decisive that here we are. But we don't really mark any of that in our liturgies or in our observance, I don't think.
Interesting.
I don't know if that's important or not, but it does seem lost.
Bewilderment and strangeness.
Because we have so many theories about why it happened, what really happened. People still looking for historicity around it, proof, all of it just misses, I think, so much of the point. And so we can get into stuff like that later. I'm interested in how the first Easter wasn't like, oh, yay, he's, he's not here. It's like, well, oh my God, what happened?
Yeah.
This is terrible.
I 100% agree. I love our Easter liturgies and the festivity and the joy in the space and in the congregation. But I also feel like there's something kind of missing from the mood here in terms of its correspondence to the first Easter. Like, this is weird. This is numinous, a word we've talked about before on the pod, that kind of means an encounter with the sacred or with the divine that is some combination of beautiful and perhaps inspiring and transformative, but also uncanny, strange, perhaps even scary. And there's an incredible blend of emotions here and a sequence of emotions that Mary goes through, as well as Peter and John. But Mary is much more of a central character in this passage.
The reason
I think you're right on. Yeah.
Just one more word about it. Just the reason I think it's possibly important is that it could add a certain amount of ease for people in being okay that we don't understand it. And also that resurrection comes in through the side door and into our own lives, and we don't understand it. We can't even imagine it happening. We can't imagine us coming out of our tombs of illness or hardship or whatever that we can't seem to see the end of. But it happens, and we can't anticipate it. So it's not something that like it should look like this and it will feel like that and it's beautiful and uplifting and joyful. It's not always like that.
Yeah.
But yet new life,
Yeah, I agree. The truth is we actually don't have the resurrection. So there's nowhere in the Bible do we know exactly what happened. Mm-hmm. We don't know how Jesus was resurrected exactly. We don't know how the linen wrappings came off of him. We don't know why the face veil is set aside. Mm-hmm. And we don't know how Matthew tells us that the angel moved the rock. And was it one of those commentators, and maybe it's Tim Keller, one of those guys saying that the tomb is opened not to let Jesus out, but to let us in. In other words, if Jesus could appear behind closed doors, we can get into like the issues around how we begin to understand the body of the risen Lord. He didn't need to walk out of the cave. So we don't actually have any of that. So since we don't have the scene of the resurrection, and if you were going to take a look at a forensic look at this, what we have is early looks at something, a mystery we don't have a picture of and we don't understand. Mm-hmm. And so what we get here is Mary's reporting, and then this let's just say bordering on either comical, meaningful, or a little weird. Peter and the beloved disciple, who gets there first? Mm-hmm. Why does that matter? Who goes in? Yeah. What, Peter's theorizing and thinking, and John sees and believes. Mm. And then what the heck does John believe? Mm-hmm. And how does that all come as they look in? And they go in the cave and they see these wrappings. And, we're going to get to Mary goes in the cave and sees angels, but the angels aren't there the first time around.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of stuff here. The more you peel back, the more you go,
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I love the apparent rivalry, I suppose, between Peter and John, or the beloved disciple. Mm-hmm. They're kind of presented as racing here, and of course the beloved disciple is faster because this is his gospel. And then later
I agree, that is exactly the reason. Ridiculous. That is exactly the reason.
He has the sense of reverence, perhaps, to stop at the entrance of the tomb, and Peter just barrels on ahead in,
right?
Because he's like that, according to all the Gospels.
I almost want to take some offense here, because your name is John.
It's true.
You have a beard. There's no gray in it. My name is Peter. I have a gray in my beard. Everybody always says Peter's the older guy, and that John outran him because he was younger and more sprite on his feet.
That is true. That is what they say.
So I'm feeling some rivalry.
I am getting some gray here if you look carefully.
Meanwhile, here I am outside the tomb.
Here's Mary over here. Oh, so we can argue all we want, and we're super on the JV, and Mary Magdalene over here is on the varsity.
Yeah. We're secondary
characters in the drama here. So let's talk a lot about the secondary characters.
Yeah,
it is interesting that the angels aren't there for this one. I mean, they appear between the time they go to their homes and Mary decides to stoop in and look. She's been there the whole time.
Yes.
That's sort of interesting.
According to Raymond Brown, he the great New Testament scholar and also a priest, and he suggests that, at least my reading of his commentary, is that there might be sort of a composite of different traditions or sources for this telling of the resurrection, because there, if you really look carefully, there's some things that are a little odd. Like, Mary just sees the stone rolled away, and from that alone she concludes that Jesus isn't there, which is a little bit odd. It isn't until verse 11 that she actually looks into the tomb, we are told.
Good point.
Yeah, it just sort of bears the marks of maybe a little bit was taken from this telling of it, a little bit was taken from that. But yeah, it is an interesting thing that you don't see the angels until later, or the men in white, as they're called in some of the other accounts. But that does seem to be it is a feature of all of the synoptic tellings of the resurrection. This time around, I mean, this is only my second podcast on this passage. It's the fourth for you two. But this time I just looked at side by side, how do the gospel accounts align and how do they differ? And that's one of the points of agreement, that there are there's one or two angels or men in white in every case, which is interesting. I just want to on the question of how these stories are told and understood and made sense of with regard to history and so on. Like, I agree with you, Elizabeth, that if we stop at the level of trying to like offer some sort of proof or set of arguments to persuade ourselves or others that like this really happened, I think there is value in that, especially in the modern world when there's such a readiness to dismiss this as myth, right? To tell people, actually, if you really look at what's going on in the historical context, there's very good reason to think that this is not just a myth, because that wouldn't explain what happened. But if we stay at that literal level, I think we can sort of stay at a remove from the mystery of the event, which isn't just in the past. Like there's one, first Easter, there's one day, one time when Jesus is raised, when he passes over from death to life. Like that happens once, but it's ripples, it's continued reality is something to be experienced now in our lives and in our ecclesial life as the body of Christ. I mean, among others, in the Christian mystical tradition, Bernard of Clairvaux, who lived about 1,000 years ago, he said that the whole sort of purpose of the Christian spiritual life is to continue the incarnation and by extension the resurrection. Like we're supposed to be living this now, and it should be a little bit strange.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's a lot of it strange. I mean, it just is strange, and we've, as Christians, sort of regularized the strangeness of it. But I think that also the scene, read in the context of the scriptures, about back to Peter and John, that certainly in John's gospel, as you were laying them out next to each other, the beloved disciple develops his own authority here as he surpasses Peter, who clearly has the authority in Luke's gospel, where the first appearance really is, to Peter, where it says, "Oh, he appeared to Peter." We don't have the exact. We don't exactly have that revelation. We do not have that revelation, and that one of the things that we find here is this: seeing is believing, and in John's gospel, believing means that one participates in the divine flow that flows through Jesus, and so there is a thing also creating authority for the Gospel of John in the Johannine community, and the Johannine resurrection community does have a different take on it, and it does have different authority figures in it. And there is a little of that being played out here too, I think.
Yeah, John is such a cohesive story because it begins with in the beginning, Genesis is the context for the understanding of what unfolds and why where Jesus comes from, what he represents, what he embodies, how his connection to God is, from before the beginning of anything. The Word was with God and was God and became flesh. So, now to begin this passage with, it was early on the first day of the week. We're right back in Genesis, right back in a recreation story. And so I really appreciate the way John tells that. And as we've spoken about in other resurrection podcasts, we talked about the gardener and how, Mary's not wrong to suspect Jesus is the gardener. We're right back in Eden. But what's interesting about the way we celebrate Easter and the resurrection is we have normalized the strangeness, I think, to a point where we've numbed ourselves to how abstract it is, really, or we've created an abstraction in some ways for many generations of Christians. When in the scripture stories, there's no mention of this is for the afterlife. This is for when you die. It's like you've got work to do. Go and do this and this. Jesus has been raised, and so now you know what to live differently now. Yeah. And I think with Good Friday, we know exactly what happened. The lynch mob came and got Jesus and put him on a cross. He was executed, and humans did that. And we have a lot of ink spilled on God did that. But we could talk about that another day, but now we have what God really did is raise Jesus from the dead. No human had anything to do with that. And we experience it But that's the work of God in this whole story, this whole epic story. And I feel like Jesus is, appearing to commission his disciples to go and respond to this resurrection by, seeing what humans do and do now what God does. Go do the work of love, the power of raising life out of death. And it's a much bigger power than the power of the kingdoms that put him on the cross.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you're bringing up the crucifixion. We have a picture of the crucifixion. I mean, he was crucified between two. I mean, we have all the Golgotha, we have all this stuff. Before we launch completely, can I just bring one more thing to the cave scene? And I know time is clicking. That Raymond Brown stuff that you're talking about. I have read that Raymond Brown stuff so many times. And I was in a bookstore a year ago, and it has a downstairs basement of random books, and I pulled a random book off the shelf, and I am glued to this random book, and it's a woman, Sandra Schneiders, who's a feminist from part of the feminist critique, and she's a Johannine scholar. And let me just bring in what she said, because it was so new to me. I just found myself reading and rereading that too. And she's talking about this, stage one, seeing and believing in the glorified Jesus, and what her contention is that the empty cave and the beloved disciples' belief shows that Jesus has returned to the Father in glory. That's the conclusion we're to draw, because that's what the Johannine John believes, or we think he believes, and that the face veil, which is different than all of the other resurrection scenes, that face veil is a Johannine sign, from the Book of Signs. This is the difference maker, is that John, whose heart has the right disposition, encounters the veil being set aside as the sign by which he comes to believe. And so it's actually this veil that is set aside. There was much about this, and I'll leave it at that. But just to say that she introduced to me a different way of thinking about this, and her discussion of it is not, it has to do with not only the historicity of it, but also that the document is put together not for the historicity, but for the meaning of it. And so John, the kerygma of John, he's describing through these elements what he thinks the resurrection means, and that stage one is about seeing and believing in the glorified Jesus, and that Jesus has gone to the Father in heaven, that reunion and recommunion, and that the second scene, which we're moving toward, is encountering and proclaiming the risen Jesus, and Jesus returns to his own people, which is what he said in the Last Supper, that he is both going and coming all at the same time. And she says that in these two scenes we get Jesus going to the Father and also returning at the same time. So she brought a whole different paradigm to this, to understand it in meaning that I had encountered before. Very, very interesting.
Wow. The two comments that you've both offered, Elizabeth, yours about how we domesticate resurrection and so easily make the jump from, this is about how there is life after death after all, or something like that. And therefore make it more about heaven than earth and our mission on earth, which sounds very along with my men in white comments earlier, sounds very science fiction, but that's not how I mean it. Our work in the world. So there's that. And then Peter, what you're saying about, John and this account in particular being written perhaps more to communicate meaning and a deeper truth than just reporting historical facts. In listening to that, it occurs to me that all of these things are being held together, and our intention, or can be intention, depending on who it is that's trying to grapple with them and hold them together. But all these things are in the mix, and perhaps that's why we tend, not we here, but people over time and in the present tend to trip up over the interpretation of these stories and of Jesus, because, is it about the spiritual or the material or the earthly? Well, it's about both, right? Like Jesus's body is risen. I think that's a pretty clear sense of all of the resurrection accounts, particularly in John and Luke, where Jesus is like, touch me, give me something to eat. And never mind the Jewish sensibility that the idea of like a disembodied soul or spirit wouldn't have made much sense. Like a soul needs a body. They go together. So the nature of the body, is it like a subtle body? Is it, how solid is it? That's all interesting to think about and discuss. But it's some sort of body. It's a earthy thing in some way, a spiritualized earthiness, but earthy in some way. And then history, metaphor, and so on. I mean, where Judaism and Christianity, and I would of course include Islam as well, differ from let's say Hinduism, is there's a much greater emphasis on history and sort of a linear timeline, if you will, through which God acts in the world and brings about God's purposes. There's a creation, and then there's the fulfillment. There's the eschaton. That's not this circular or cyclical conception of time and of the cosmos. So that to say that, metaphor and meaning making uncoupled from history very quickly loses its meaning in a Jewish or Christian or biblical sense. And yet, clearly, in so much of the biblical accounts, including of the Gospels and of these resurrection stories, history is mixed with and overlain by metaphor and mythological elements, and it's all mixed together. And the writer doesn't say, well, this part really happened, you could have taken a photo of that, but this part communicates a deeper truth that's deeper than historical. It doesn't tell us these things, but it's all there together. Heaven and earth and history and metaphor and myth, and it's all mixed together, which is a lot to sit with.
Yeah.
I mean, John, the community of John, as Raymond Brown talks so much about, and the beloved God community, I guess he calls it, the Johannine community. They have so much more distance than Matthew, Mark, and Luke's communities from the events that he's writing about, and at the same time that he has this really heightened Christology, that the cosmic Christ and everything, it's so incarnational. He never loses the physicality of Jesus, as you've said, and as you talked about the cloths and everything. And I think that's a thing that we have separated again. That we want earth and heaven to be separate and body and spirit to be separate. And John, if we spend enough time with John, we would see so clearly that, the incarnate Christ continues and he ascends, but the presence of Christ is always here. And I think that, with the veil being removed, there's so much symbolism in John that, you could be talking about the temple, the Holy of Holies now open for all time and exposed, and the bread of life is for everyone, feeding the world. We could talk for years about the symbolism in John, but I think he's writing for my point is he's writing for a community who's practicing their faith, and they know they have a commission. It's the early church, the heyday of early Christian mission. And I think that they are able to hold together better than we are, the symbols and the concrete, and to know more what they have to say. So, to kind of build on that. So and to maybe anchor it a little bit more in the exact words of the scripture here. So what we get is Mary's, in these 18 verses, we get Mary pursuing the question of where is the Lord? That's what she is. Where is he? Where is he? And that she moves from weeping to recognition. And in the process, she's so blinded by her grief, she doesn't understand it. So in other words, she sees the angel, she blows right by the angel. She doesn't say, hey, we've got some angels here, right? And then she misunderstands the encounter with Jesus, right? And she sees him with her eyes, doesn't recognize him, and thinks he's the gardener, and that layered with all kinds of meaning. He speaks to her, and she does not recognize him by voice, and then she recognizes when she hears her name, and it says in the verse where it says, and she, let me see if I can find that verse. Can you just read that sentence? Jesus said to her, Mary, and she turned and said to him in Hebrew, Rabboni, which means teacher.
Okay, so Schneider's points out that this is one of the most poignant sentences in the whole of the New Testament. And she also points out that Mary doesn't turn. She's already looking at him. So her turning is she's already turned to see the gardener. Her turning is an existential turn. It's a conversion turn. It's a turn to a new understanding. And what is the turn to the new understanding? It's that that Jesus, the historical Jesus, the person of Jesus, the relationship she had with that person is no longer a thing to be had. That's why she can't hold on to him, cling to him, or however we might translate that. That now Jesus is, that's the pre-Easter Jesus. The post-Easter Jesus is the Jesus who is entering into glory and is now Jesus the Christ. So now we move I'm layering on the cosmic Christ on this because that's not in the text exactly. But we now move to the Jesus who's available to everybody at all time and in all ways, and is the beginnings of, as we pointed out earlier, the new creation. But Mary's conversion is to the Easter Jesus, not the pre-Easter Jesus. And then we get the last part of the work, which is his essential call to Mary to be the apostle to the apostles. And Schneider's also points out that when Jesus in the next scene meets with the 11 and breathes that commission and mission that you guys are talking about, that mission in the community, he doesn't actually commission them with a go and make disciples kind of thing. I'm obviously stealing from Matthew in that, but that literally only comes to Mary. The go and tell, and that the go and tellness. What is she to tell? Well, that I have seen the Lord. Yes, this authority of I have seen Jesus. This being a certain authority in the early church. I mean, look at how Paul falls back on this. Paul's authority is that I saw him. But that the kerygma is different in John's gospel in that, back to your reference to the prologue, is and to Jesus' final words on the cross, it is finished. In other words, that which was said in the prologue comes to completion. And what comes to completion? But that we might be siblings of God and have relationship with this God through the resurrected Christ. And now that has actually come to pass. That all the stuff that in the last discourse, the final discourse, all the gospel stuff in John now comes to completion and it's done. That's what's being proclaimed here, is that all the stuff predicted at the beginning of John's gospel in the prologue is true.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's in the prologue that through the Word made flesh, who came into the world to enlighten it, to give those who receive him and believe in his name the power to become children of God, is fulfilled here when Jesus says, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and to your God. Like, yes, this is the thing, that Jesus embodies perfect humanity, spiritualized humanity, and does it in such a way that is meant to be the blueprint for the rest of us throughout all time to follow him. And that this was like not to be taken for granted in the Jewish consciousness, that we could call God our Father, right? Like I was talking about this with the confirmands confirmation class the other day, because I was walking through the Eucharistic liturgy with them. And I was trying to help them to understand, perhaps take some modicum of interest in why we say the Lord's Prayer after the Eucharistic prayer. Because all this salvation history, everything that prepares the way for Jesus, creation, the calling of Israel, the prophets, then Jesus, then his death and resurrection for us, and the gift of his Spirit, making us his people, and so on. Because of all of that, we are bold to say, our Father. And this is the thing. We are drawn into the relationship that Jesus has with the Father in the Spirit, So,
well, it's a whole ever expanding universe, a new creation, which in some of the podcasts we've talked a bit more. N.T. Wright and your insights about Jesus. Ironically, he is the gardener. So as we finish up, Rob, can you bring me that bottle? So, Rob, stick your head in here so everybody can see you. Here's the man behind the screen, the man of all things. Rob, stay with us here. So, Rob has brought us some Rob, you tell us what you've brought us here, because this is something of great import.
Yeah, I came across this when I was searching for soda one day, and this brand Sprecher, they make a Rev'd up root beer, and I spelled exactly like we do, and I was like, I got to take advantage of that. That's how we're celebrating our 200th episode. Now, no sponsorship, but listen, call us. We can get these three on your bottles. Think about it. Get their mugs on your mug of root beer.
Fire brewed craft soda.
Yeah. Thanks. So Rev'd up root beer. We're going to go wild at our staff meeting, which follows here because it says it's caffeinated. It's been 200 podcasts, and it has been an incredible journey of the scriptures. Breaking into our lives, and it's anew every day and anew every time we look in. And we're super grateful to all of you who participate with us in this ever-going midrash, in which we continue to find new meaning in the scriptures as the Spirit speaks to us through the words. I mean, the Word of God and the words of humans touches us deeply. And Rob, we couldn't do it without you. And we're super psyched for our Rev'd up root beer, and we wish you the happiest of happy Easters. And may you be totally discombobulated like those who got to the tomb, and also filled with joy, because in John's Gospel, what does the Kerygma teach us? That the resurrected Jesus will bring us his joy and make his joy complete. So we hope that your Easter is full of the Jesus joy, and that you too can be revved up with the man. So peace be with you. God bless you, and happy Easter. See you again. Thank you.